This is Bonjour Hi, the No Nazis at Zabars edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about Only Murders in the Building, Judaism, the Upper West Side, and then we have a great interview with Shalom Auslander about the N-word. No, not that one. Nazis. We discuss this piece in Tablet Magazine and discuss so much more. All that and more coming right up. Phoebe, can we start talking about geography? You wrote a column recently about, let's call it sociogeography, popular culture, and this was spurred on by your watching of Only Murders in the Building. Maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on here.
Sure, yes. So because I have little children, we have Disney Plus, and I saw that there was this show that I'd heard good things about, Only Murders in the Building, with Steve Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. And I love a sort of comic murder mystery. Whenever murder mystery is actually comedy, that's sort of one of my favorite types of shows. So I was very excited to watch this. And all the more so when I saw that it's set on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is not the specific neighborhood of Manhattan that I grew up in, but it's very near the one I grew up in, and I know it very well. So I thought, this will be kind of fun. And something about the show seemed strange because it had a certain aesthetic. Like the typeface of the title is very much like the New Yorker magazine typeface, and just the building it's set in, it's sort of a fictionalized version of a few different buildings, but is the facade they show is this building, the Belle Nord, that Isaac Bashevis Singer, Zero Mostel, Marilyn Monroe, and various other famous Jews have lived in. Anyway, and there was just and there's stuff about delis and all this. It's like a very, very certain type of New York. Like when anti-Semites of yore would talk about somebody as being a little too New York, they meant like that, like a certain type.
As we call them nowadays, coastal, right?
Right, exactly. But yeah, there was something about it where this show is clearly like Jewy beyond all get out, but it's not just but nobody's Jewish in it. The actors aren't Jewish. The characters aren't Jewish. The only person who sort of dings as Jewish is some minor character who's like a woman who lives in the building and is seen in kind of like group shots at various points, who's played by the actress Jackie Hoffman, who does, to her credit, look like about 80% of people you see in the Fairway supermarket. Like, I get it. Like she's, that's the thing. That's what people on the Upper West Side seem like. And there was just something about the show, and like a few, I'll get into it more as we're talking more, but like certain moments where it really clicked for me, like this is a show about a Jewish neighborhood without Jews. And that seemed, I was not mad at the show. I'll get into why also, but it just seemed interesting. So this prompted me to then Google, not only to confirm that the people in it who I thought were not Jewish are not Jewish, but also how Jewish is the Upper West Side? Is this just my subjective impression as somebody who is Jewish and spent time there? Am I just noticing the things about it that are? And the demographics are approximately, and this is like, some of this is from like 2013, so I'm not sure exactly what it is today, but it's approximately 70,000 Jews in a neighborhood of about 200,000 people. So it's not a majority. It's not Tel Aviv, but it's not, virtually anywhere else either. It's pretty Jewish. So, that's the short version. But yeah, so my column this week for the CJN was sort of the longer version of that.
So I had questions for you about this because I had thoughts.
Please.
I have been to the Upper West Side. I was dating, when I was dating my wife, she was living on the Upper West Side. And I was around there a lot. I had friends in the Upper West Side before I was dating her. This is as you mentioned, it is a big enclave for a lot of young single Jews, for example. And I was trying to make a distinction because I know that the Upper West Side is very much, like you say, a Jewish sort of neighborhood. but it's not Flatbush. It's not Borough Park. It's not Teaneck, New Jersey. And I think what I was trying to create in my mind was sort of like, oh, yes, it is very Jewish. But how many of the Jews are identifiably Jewish who live in this neighborhood? And as a result, like if that's the same sort of, statement that I was trying to get at or thinking that I was going for, trying to wrap my head around this, a lot of the Jews in the Upper West Side, or a lot of the Jews who identify as Jews internally, but go about their day-to-day existence, as people, right, not necessarily readily identifiably Jews, are just, they're out there in the street. So that the first point that I was like thinking to myself and wanted to ask you was like, how many of those Jews of the 70,000 are actually observant? And when you walk around the Upper West Side, right, I don't necessarily see it as a Jewish. I know that Barney Greengrass is there, and I know that Zabars is there, but I also know that, Dean and DeLuca is a lot more visible, right, and it doesn't read as Jewish, and neither does Gristidi.
Yeah.
Fairway was, it was there, and does it read as Jewish? No. Is it where the Jews shop?
Does the Fairway
Maybe.
read as Jewish? Ooh, we're going to have a big argument on that.
But anyways,
yes.
It's where you get the kosher meat on the Upper West Side. As much as there's a lot of Jews in the Upper West Side and it is Jewy, it doesn't necessarily mean that Jews are going to be pervasive wherever you look.
I would say Jews are extremely visible on the Upper West Side, but yes, there are, so it's sort of the yes and no. You're right, it's not a Jewish neighborhood in the same sense of that as Borough Park. It's not full of Haredi Jews. It's not. That's a different community. There are more observant Jews around 96th Street, less observant Jews.
That's exactly where my wife lived, like 96 in West End.
There you go. I know this area quite well. And basically, what I would say about the less observant, first of all, there are still synagogues. There are still Jewish institutions. There's the JCC on Amsterdam in the 70s. Like, there are a lot of Jewish institutions, a lot of non-iconic Jewish and Israeli restaurants. There are a lot of places with sort of Jewish institutions of one sort or another throughout that neighborhood. Okay, so it's not just that there's like Barney Greengrass, there's a lot. But also, I think you get with a different population density of Jews, you get like a culturally Jewish neighborhood. Like, how do you know if you're in an Italian neighborhood? How do you know if you're in a Puerto Rican neighborhood? Like, everybody knows who's everybody around to a certain degree. And like, okay, so I have a very concrete example of this that's not about like vibes or Judar or anything. There was a man who would stand in front of the Fairway, I think it was either the Fairway or Zabars, I don't remember, with a table set up where he would sell autographed copies, I believe, of Philip Roth novels. Okay.
And was he the one autographing them, or was Philip Roth the one autographing
No, I think
them?
Philip Roth was, I think my mother may have like once met Philip Roth at this table, but the point is like, or maybe I'm imagining this, but the point is there definitely was this Philip Roth book table. Things like that is just one example. Like, it is culturally Jewish. It literally, like, that is it. That is where it all is. That does not, to my mind, make it count less in some way than Flatbush or whatever, and then Flatbush is its own, that could be a separate topic. But it's less visibly Jewish in the sense of like, you do not immediately know that somebody's Jewish if they're wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And like a woman in jeans and a t-shirt, you don't know if she's Jewish necessarily, right? However, I think that the culture of that neighborhood is famously Jewish. It is a famous Jewish neighborhood. It is extremely important to Jewish culture and history and the present day. And this is like a center of Jewish civilization. The Upper West Side is how I would put it. You don't think so because you're more, okay, strong. I could not, like, I cannot understand disagreeing with that. Like unless you say that the only Jewishness that counts is religious, and that to me seems limited.
The way that I would put it is that it is definitely a Jewish enclave, but it's not a Jewish enclave in the way that Little Italy is an enclave where everything Jewish is going on. I think it's an everything enclave that happens to have a lot of Jews. I know that we're going to strong disagree. I want to come to another point, though, which I think comes right up against this, which is that even where you have strong Jewish neighborhoods, I think that Jews often tend to congregate with other Jews, socially, culturally, especially when they are in neighborhoods with a lot of other Jews. And if you have non-Jews in a building, it doesn't mean that automatically you're going to have this diversity of people and like, oh, there's going to have to be 4 Jews in with this group of people. The people that are not Jewish in this group might not have a lot of other Jewish friends, and that's okay. And I know And the only monkey wrench in that whole thing is, as you point out, they try really hard in the writing to write in a lot of other diverse characters, and the only Jewish character there is in the background. But the real point that I'm trying to say is that I wouldn't even mind if you have a group of people who live in a very Jewish neighborhood who aren't Jewish show up, simply because that is the neighborhood. The Upper West Side is very, very much, even if it's not Jewish in this specific instance, it is very much a part of the story. And sometimes non-Jews live and have non-Jewish friends, and they don't need to have Jewish friends in order to prove that they are in the Upper West Side.
Okay, so I address this in the piece. I address exactly this in the piece, and I'm going to address it right now.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
So I do not object to the fact that the core characters aren't Jewish. That seems both demographically true to life and just like, why not? Like, you know, obviously most people who live on the Upper West Side aren't Jewish. There's nothing weird about there being non-Jews hanging out together on the Upper West Side. What is weird is to have this extremely like sort of neurotic, white, artsy, intellectual of a certain age, Woody Allen vibe, New Yorker magazine vibe thing happening. This is extremely a certain type of Upper West Side world, okay? This isn't just geography like which streets they live on. This is like, it matters that they're in the building Isaac Bashevis Singer was in. You know what I mean? Like, that is the type of cachet they're going for. They're going for a certain thing. So nobody, it's like there's one person in the background of this building that's like the Jewiest possible building is at all Jewish. And then this is where it gets really interesting, and I think more definitive than where I've gone with this so far, which is like, okay, maybe it is a sort of culture that's very infused with Jewishness, but for some reason, we just don't happen to be meeting any individual characters who are Jews, which is fine, you know, like, yes, they seem to have ticked every other possible box except for Jews. Fine, one might say. Then you get to the Deli King, okay? And Avi, I'm going to want your thoughts on the Deli King, because the Deli King is a character played by Nathan Lane, who is indeed a deli tycoon, a delicatessen tycoon. First, it seems like specializing in hummus. Then later, there's this little shot of a tabloid about how it sells lox. Okay, lox, right? Mm-hmm. Is he Jewish? No. He is, however, from a family of Holocaust survivors, but it is Greek and Armenian Holocaust, which is not a phrase. I've heard genocide. I've never heard specifically that phrasing, Greek and Armenian Holocaust. I have no opinion about whether, like, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying they choose to have a character with this kind of like very, very classically Upper West Side family backstory and make a real, and he's a deli tycoon. But he is not Jewish. Let's be clear, not Jewish. This man, not Jewish. And he's Greek, okay? So, like, it just all seems very much, it's like, it's not, so if you take any of these things in isolation, it's like, okay, fine. It just seems like an artistic choice. I'm not saying cancel these people. I'm not saying cancel the show. I'm still watching the show. I think it's pretty funny. I just wonder about the choice. Why make it without Jews? So I guess, Avi, if I understand what you're saying, you're saying like it's not even really all that Jewish anyway over there. It's not Borough Park. A secular Jew's the same as a Gentile's the same as anything. Who cares, kind of? Or am I getting it wrong?
So if I had to sum up everything that you're saying is that I agree with you. And the way that I'm going to agree with you in a way that I think is going to split the difference is that this is the George Costanza and his parents of a whole show, right? The entirety of the show is basically structured as George Costanza, who is not a Jewish name and clearly not a Jewish deliberately like Jewish written name individual, but is clearly Jewish through to the core, and his parents are Jewish through to the core, and everything that he does is Jewish through to the core. And we've discussed this in the past, and for whatever artistic reason, because George Costanza became George Costanza, not, Larry David, or however we're going to read into the Seinfeld, tea leaves and get biblical commentary, get Talmudic about Seinfeld. This whole show is that, right? Is to sort of say, but in the
2020s with this huge degree of attention to diversity generally. So Seinfeld, yes. So that's where I'm kind of confused.
This is the first. I'm just making that as an observation.
Sure. Okay.
But that's what is going on with the show.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
And I think that my initial point still stands. That I think what happened in the Upper West Side is. And this is where you and I see the Jewishness, I think, a little differently. There's a lot of Jews on the Upper West Side. Jewiness and Jewishness and Jew stuff has really pervaded a lot of Upper West Side culture, as it has a lot of New Yorkness in general. And the Upper West Side is very much a microcosm and a lens for that, as Jewish, as having Jewness to it. But there's not a lot of Judaism, the way that we've discussed this in the past. And as a result, the upshot and the amazing thing is that Jew-y culture has really opened itself up through all of the Upper West Side, to the point where even non-Jews live this sort of culture that has a lot of Jewiness in it. And then the downside of it is that as a result, you can have a show with non-Jewish characters all over the place that are doing Jewy things without having a lot of Jews around in there. And this is the upshot and downshot of having upshot and downshot. Let's go with it. The upshot and downshot of having assimilated Jewiness pervade into a larger culture, as opposed to where in Borough Park, the Jews are there, or Williamsburg, the Jews are there, the hipsters are in another neighborhood, and
many of the hipsters are Jewish. Well, many of the hipsters are Jewish, but not observant. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that that's what we're seeing in this show. And to be fair, I know we're talking about New York, and it's a more of a Canadian show, but I think this really has a lot of truth for a lot of the other Jewish neighborhoods in Canada and elsewhere. Zach, I see you frantically waving. Do you want to jump in here?
I just wanted to jump in because I'm also a big fan of the show. Phoebe, what would you have wanted to see to help you know that someone was Jewish? Because to me, it sort of seems like everyone on the show is Jewish, and it seems like actually like the
that's
amount
my
of
point.
Jewishness.
Thank you, Zach. That's saying it better than I could have said it.
That it's not that there are no Jews, but it seems like everyone on the show is sort of Jewish, and in fact, reflects the level of Jewishness of most of the people who live on the Upper West Side. So, does that A, track for you, and B, to know that a character was Jewish, would you have wanted them to show a scene of them, going to synagogue, or, so that you know that a character is or is not actually Jewish versus Jewy and lives on the Upper West Side?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Thanks, Zach. I can easily answer this one. Yeah. Yes. So, first of all, I want to just be clear about what, in terms of want to see, I want to just slightly change the question. It's more what would I have needed to see? Obviously, given, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but given my own, lack of religiosity, I'd like to think, obviously, is not about synagogue. What would have indicated some degree of Jewishness? A Jewish actor, they never mention that the person isn't Jewish. That might be a clue. So the Jackie Hoffman character, she's never discussed, really, at least not in the episodes I've seen, but she is a type. She is straight out of the Upper West Side. She is Jewish. To me, this is just I can't even put into it. I cannot explain this in words. She just is. A group of actors who are not themselves Jewish, playing characters, nothing in their name indicates they're Jewish. Now, not all Jews have Jewish names. Not all Jews are any particular ethnicity. I get that. They never mention, it could be there could be a reference to being Jewish. Seinfeld has plenty of references to Jerry being Jewish, and it's not that he's, observant, the character, right? It's referenced that he's Jewish. You're not left wondering. There could be certain books on the bookshelf might indicate it. There could be like a menorah or a Hanukkah on a
and that's where I
saying,
think that's where you've lost me, because like,
okay, but I'm saying
so many people who don't have a lot of obvious signs,
but they could just literally say it. Like that would be my first
pick. Honestly, like Oliver Putnam, right, the Martin Short character, could easily be Jewish. There's nothing that says that he isn't Jewish.
Other than his name being Oliver Putnam.
And his being portrayed by Martin Short. I mean,
Phoebe, like, of your experience of those types of Jews, either on the Upper West Side or on the Upper East Side where you come from, do you think that people, like, drop more explicit things about, like, oh, because, like, I'm from a Jewish background or whatever? Do people drop more explicit hints about their Judaism? Or is this like a pretty accurate portrayal?
No, I think in actual life, an Oliver Putnam could be Jewish. On a television show, you would only know this if this was said.
And in my mind, if they just made this dropped reference, or if they just stuck a menorah in the background, I'd be like, that's such tokenism. This person doesn't need to be Jewish. There's nothing advancing the plot in his Jewishness. And so why are you doing this? Just make him Jewy, let him be, and that's it.
Strong disagree, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not about advancing a plot. It's about, if you're going to try to have a show a specific world, and this is a specific world. This is not, they did not invent, like, you know, north-south land neighborhood or whatever. This is the Upper West Side of Manhattan, specific neighborhood with a specific history and a specific present. It would be adding sort of a layer of authentic detail. That's what it would be doing. It doesn't mean that the show is suddenly about, like, that there are biblical references or something. No, this doesn't make it a religiously Jewish show. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot being about, like, Jewish values. It has nothing to do with that. It's about who actually lives in this neighborhood. It's a Jewish neighborhood. To have nobody Jewish in it is weird. It's not. But what I'm trying to get at, the other thing that I was trying to get at in the column is, it's weird, but I want to examine it, and I don't want to, like, but I'm not mad at it. I'm curious about the choice, because it seems just like a strange choice to me, like to have the deli king not be Jewish. Why, what is behind that choice? It's just interesting. I think it's interesting. I'm not saying that this means that the people behind the show have some kind of or up to something nefarious. I'm not saying, oh no, actually, let's be more worried about this than Hamas. Like, I'm not being nuts about it. I find it genuinely interesting, especially in light of the fact that a show like Seinfeld or Friends or whatever, all of these shows were discussed as, like, showing a very white New York, or Girls, right? You know, the Lena Dunham show, showing this very, very white world within New York. And sort of, if Jewishness was erased at all in a show like Seinfeld, it would have been in favor of this sort of whiteness that was supposed to be more palatable to certain audiences at the time, whether or not, whatever. That the point is, it's interesting to have embraced a lot of other forms of diversity and then to sort of not talk about Jews. I don't know. That's what I found kind of interesting. Again, I do find it hard to talk about these topics without sort of, like, the expectation is, so you're really mad at Martin Short and Steve Martin and Selena Gomez now, right? And it's like, no, I'm not actually mad at, I'm not mad at anybody.
Right. It sounds like, Avi, you still code, even though Avi, do you see these people as Jews?
Yes.
Like, for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and that's, I think, at the core of what's going on here. And with this, I think...
Who's the gatekeeper now, Phoebe?
To wrap up, is to sort of say, like,
do they want in? But do they see themselves as Jews? I mean, I would think...
Right? There's Jewiness in the air, and they're part of this, and this is what they're doing, and they could be, they could not be, and I think that that's what's going on here, is that the way in which you come at your Judaism or your Jewishness really ends up interpreting how you end up seeing characters on a screen.
Fair enough.
Let's move on to our excellent interview with Shalom Auslander right after we hear from our sponsor.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
Words. Unlike dancing about architecture, talking about words actually makes a lot of sense. And in the highly charged and incredibly verbose world we live in, we sometimes lose sight of the value of words, both collectively and individually. It's said that the Soloveitchik rabbinic dynasty had a family proverb about how not every thought should be said, not everything spoken should be written, and not everything written should be published. And yet we find ourselves in a world that does exactly that. The distance between thinking something and publishing it has essentially vanished, often to the detriment of humanity, and there is little that is left unsaid anymore. Well, according to Shalom Auslander, at least one of the words that we should leave unsaid is Nazi. As he writes in an article on Tablet, though if you've been reading his Substack, this has been percolating for weeks, the word Nazi had power. The word could shake the earth. The word was sacred. And now we run the risk of rendering it into nothing, literally turning it, 3, 2, 1, literally turning it into the next literally. Shalom Auslander is the author of 4 books, as well as many other written things online and on printed pages, and has appeared many times on This American Life. Shalom, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you.
Can you start by telling us a bit about the genesis of this piece and your thinking around it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really like writing about Nazis or the Holocaust for fun. But I have a newsletter on Substack that I started about 6 months ago. I've avoided all sort of social media. I have no social media presence whatsoever, and was very happy. But I'd heard good things about Substack from Edgar Carrot, who's a friend of mine and a writer. And so I decided to give it a shot. And within 5 months later, I'm hearing that Substack has a Nazi problem. And I looked into it and I read the articles that were written about it. And 2 things stuck out to me. One was that it didn't seem like a particularly big problem. And the other was that I'm just completely Nazi'd out. I'm just tired of hearing this word and people being called that. And I realized in thinking about it, that word is completely meaningless at this point. It has no power. We use it casually. We accuse anybody we want of being a Nazi. And I was raised with the Holocaust. I sat next to a Holocaust survivor in shul. I watched Holocaust newsreels as a little kid in yeshiva. That was a heavy word. And somehow I'm now in my 50s and it's a joke word. It doesn't mean anything. And that's sad. And that is criminal.
It was interesting that there was this unspoken parallel between the word Nazi and the idea of Amalek, right, that you're highlighting in the piece. Amalek is the enemy of the Jews in the Bible that attacked them in the desert, right? The biblical injunction is both to erase the name of Amalek for what they did to the Jews, but also never to forget it. Essentially turns the word into the ancient F-bomb. Right? You use it, but only when it's strong, when it actually has some meaning, but you can never forget it. You don't want to erase this idea, but you have to use it in this way. And what you're sort of hinting at is the idea that, like, when everybody becomes a Nazi, then you no longer have this idea of what an enemy is or what it means to have somebody who actually hates you, that there's something strong about something, and when you use it for everything, it becomes nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is truer of the word anti-Semite, which also gets thrown around a lot and is probably on life support. With the word Nazi, I guess when I heard that word growing up, it referred to those monsters in those black and white newsreel clips, stacking dead Jews into piles with bulldozers. Not someone who hates Jews, not someone who even ascribes to Nazi ideology. When I was growing up, that was called a neo-Nazi, and that word worked fine, right? And if you look it up, it means, people in the wake of World War II who try to revive that ideology.
It sounds like what we're getting at here is that we're really expansionist when it comes to having enemies. And I can't figure out, is it that we're defining Nazi or enemies or anti-Semite wrong? Or is there something wrong with us that we just see enemies wherever it is that we go and we have to start realizing not everybody's out to get us?
For me, I think it's both. And that's, right now, as it always is when Israel's involved in some kind of conflict, you hear more about it. But it's almost like if I were African American, I don't think I'd throw around the word. I wouldn't say, boy, this office job that pays me $100,000 a year is like slavery because I don't get Christmas off. Slavery was slavery. Slavery was an impossibly hideous thing. And we just throw around Holocaust and Nazi, and I don't know where it comes from. We're the ones who do it most of all. I mean, it's
That was actually going to be my question about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly galling when some senator says to somebody else, the right wing has a Nazi problem. I'm like, go fuck yourself. Shut up.
Well, what I wanted to ask about, though, wasn't so much senators, but more like the soup Nazi on Seinfeld or Mel Brooks and the producers, and just kind of the role of Nazis in Jewish comedy post-war, and the way that it can be sort of almost about diffusing something or processing it, or I don't know how you want to put it, but like, how do you see that use of Nazi where it's Jews? What do you think of that type of use of Nazi?
I think it's funny because
like
that's
soup Nazi.
To your point, that is what it's doing, and it's funny. It's taking what was hurtful and painful and having a go at it. We are diffusing it, but that's different than accusing somebody of being a Nazi. Right? That's a completely different thing. And first of all, Seinfeld was a Jew, so was Mel Brooks. So to me, that's like, you get a pass at joking at things when you've been victimized by them. But I don't know that I would feel the same way if I heard that Seinfeld said that Donald Trump was a Nazi. Right? There's a distinction. And maybe Donald Trump is a Nazi. I don't really know. Having Mein Kampf by his bedside isn't a good sign. but until we know he is, then we don't say so. And it feels like that those are very different things. Everything I write is using humor to correct things or tear down things. And I think it's a tremendous weapon. But it's very different than saying, I didn't get that apartment because the people on the board were Nazis and hate Jews. And, my mother used to sit around at home reading the Jewish press, which, is still around, I think, and might as well be just called Who's a Nazi Today? Yes. And all it is Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. And I hear someone's a Nazi and I think, why? Are they wearing tall leather boots? Has it come to that? That's all this word means anymore? This
jumped out at me, this idea of Nazi having come to be shorthand for racist, and therefore right. In a very very U.S.-centric way of looking at things, specifically, a very specifically U.S. type of racist.
Look, the word racist is dying, if not dead. What does racist mean anymore? I mean, I get called a racist just going ahead of somebody in line at Target. Like, it's a meaningless word, and it's a critical word. Because when it does come up about a cop or a rally or a politician, and you use that word, well, that word doesn't mean shit anymore. So what is this? What are we doing? Words matter.
I think what you're highlighting is that somebody who is out to get you, but because of you as a person, not you as a class of other, right? A racial minority, a religious minority, something else, right? That doesn't make them a racist or an anti-Semite or something. You're a bad person, and they're the person that, like, you think to yourself, oh, that person is horrible. He must be an anti-Semite because I did something wrong and now they hate me, right? And we have to be able to learn to differentiate the fact that sometimes people don't like you, not because you're a Jew, but just because you might be a bad person. And on top of that, the other layer of, like, we have to start learning that not everybody's always out to get us.
Every people in the world have a reason to be afraid. We've all been through horrors. And so it is hard to know when, we're all PTSD'd and should be. But that isn't an excuse. That's just a reason. And I think it's up to us. My parents and their parents were closer to the event. We're 3 generations now, at least I am, from it. I couldn't forget it if I wanted to, but part of what comes with that, I think, is the responsibility to protect it and to honor it, and to not, every time someone draws a swastika on a bathroom wall, that's not a Nazi. That's a schmuck. It's an asshole. And that's a problem. but it's not Nazi. I think we can address our enemies today without degrading the memory of our enemies from yesterday.
Yeah, Zach, you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly jump in because it sounds like there's sort of two issues at hand. One is a general in society, so much language is becoming sort of hyperbolized. And you just talked about, like, we all have PTSD. Everyone has PTSD. Everyone is traumatized. Someone said something at the supermarket and it did violence to them and it traumatized them. And there's sort of a ramping up of all of these terms that once meant something very, very severe. And now people throw them around a lot more easily. But the thing that I wanted to ask was, the reason why Holocaust education is so important isn't that it was like a singular event, isn't that the like Nazis and Germans were so special. Like, this could happen anywhere. These were the top scientists and top minds in the world who were curdled by these fascist forces that could pop up anywhere. And so we shouldn't think that the Nazis were so unique. We need to be on guard because humans tend towards these types of behaviors and we need to be conscientious of them.
I think, in the first place, there are different levels of on guard. There's DEFCON 1 and DEFCON 5, right? Or whatever the color system was after 9/11 for terrorist threats. We tend to walk around in red. And what happens with that is that when it's the boy who cried Nazi, I mean, we've said it so many times. And I say in the piece, when I was a kid, Billy Idol was a Nazi, David Bowie was a Nazi, everyone was a Nazi, Jesse Jackson was a Nazi, Al Sharpton was a Nazi, everyone was a Nazi.
Did you have that story in yeshiva that the song In the Air Tonight was about Phil Collins watching a Jewish friend of his die and not doing anything about it and deliberately... there was that story, and then there was always a handful of other stories that like showed that this piece of popular culture was like showing how much this person hated the Jews. And there was always some weird Talmudic read of some piece of popular culture that was about that. I remember that was a big feature of my yeshiva days.
Yeah, I had the thing where, because it was so ingrained, all the lyrics I listened to, I always thought I heard something anti-Semitic. The joint was jumping. I heard the Jews were jumping. I heard whatever it was. Like, there was some Bob Marley song about pirates, them rabbis, and I was like, rabbis aren't pirates, and that's not what he was saying. So you just hear it all over the place. Look, you guys are in Canada. I live in a country where after this, I'm going to go get some canned peas, some underwear, and if I want, I can get a handgun and ammo. So if it comes to that, I'll be at the front lines.
But what I was going to ask, though, is like to just expand it beyond specifically the term Nazi and to talk a little bit about the term anti-Semite. And this might be where I have a weird out there galaxy-brained take. I don't see like Hamas as specifically anti-Semitic. To me, this seems like a different thing. And I find that is a little bit confusing, maybe, to think of it like... To me, this seems like Palestinians who are mad at Israel... It's a different phenomenon than European anti-Semitism. That doesn't mean excusable. It means different. It's a different context, and maybe a different term should be used for that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the people who say that don't know any Palestinians. I do, and it isn't anti-Semitism. You're right. They've been degraded and hurt and just terrorized for a very long time. And the reality is most of Israel agrees with that statement. Not their leadership, but most of Israel agrees with that. Hamas hates everybody. Hamas hates Christians. Hamas hates Palestinians. They'll very happily kill Palestinians for whatever religious cause they're on. They're thugs. So I agree with you that calling them an anti-Semite not just is the wrong word, but it actually isn't strong enough for what they are. So I agree, but I think that's part of what we've reflexively done with these words, is we don't think about them. We use them lazily, And then the next time we use them, we wonder why no one is listening.
What's your prescription, aside from the obvious, which is stop using the word Nazi so freely? I like the idea of making it the Jewish, and well, it's the reverse of the Jewish N-word. It's that, we don't get to say it. Maybe Nazis are the only ones who can call themselves Nazis. Anyways, mentally, psychologically, and as somebody who clearly you've moved from a certain space to another space, and you write about this, how do you move from this space of everybody hating you to realizing what real hatred is, or what real enemies, what real Nazism, or what real anti-Semitism is, as opposed to just, hey, you, get out of my, line, stop cutting.
Yeah. Step out of America for a minute. My wife's British. She grew up with genuine anti-Semitism. Like, can't wear a yarmulke because people are going to come over and give you shit. Like, go to Israel. Go speak to people. And also go speak to people you assume are anti-Semites and maybe aren't. Because we tend to paint with a wide brush. And I am not suggesting there isn't anti-Semitism. There is. We're hated. A lot of people hate black people and a lot of people hate gay people. But the question is that how much of a reaction and what type of reaction should that get from us? If someone hates Jews, say so. My son's in university, in a very, very well-known big university, in a liberal state, hasn't seen any of it. There was an article in the Israeli paper, Haaretz, by two professors in Israeli in America, saying they don't see it at all. And so that doesn't mean it isn't there, but we forget that the way we live now is not natural. We are inundated with news. And the old saw of news is if it bleeds, it leads. And so we're being driven, in a sense, to a sort of state of panic every day, every one of us on different panic buttons, and this is one of them. I think that you have to kind of go, well, let me just put all this news shit aside because they have an agenda, and ask myself, well, okay, so how many people do I know on universities? And I've spoken to people, and someone will say to me, yeah, no, my friend's son had a really scary incident. And I was like, oh, so what happened? Oh, well, they were in the Hillel house, and they saw a bunch of pro-Palestinian marchers, and they thought they were coming at them, and they had to call security. I'm like, well, they thought they were coming at them, and they called security. That's not an act of anti-Semitism. That's a reaction to fear. So we have to ask ourselves, what's really going on? What's really happening? And we, unfortunately, the ADL has become a political institution. They changed their definition of anti-Semitism. Anything anti-Israel is anti-Semitism, which it isn't. And so now we don't even know, because they're the primary place for these numbers, but we can't trust those numbers. So ask yourself, and even, by the way, the idiot protesters who are saying from the river to the sea, first of all, they don't know what it means, and college kids are supposed to be schmucks. They're always schmucks. Does that make them anti-Semitic? No, it just means they're reactionary idiots who do what their professors tell them to do. But is that an anti-Semite? I don't think so.
One of the things that you're highlighting, and this is a point that we've made on the show, or I've made on the show in the past, and I've thought about this a lot, is that anti-Semitism has basically become the new Judaism, right? Fighting anti-Semitism, right? Looking for anti-Semitism, saying that I fight anti-Semitism has become the big tent under which everybody can congregate. It's basically become the new way in which everybody who's Jewish can be, for lack of a better way, Haredi, right? You're Haredi if you fight anti-Semitism, right? Not Haredi as in like you're an ultra-Orthodox, but the way that you show your strong Judaism is daily you fight anti-Semitism. And this like rabid focus on one thing without this without this buffet of other Jewish things is, I think, what we seem to be missing, right? You very much lived in a world, I live in a world where, this is a problem where what happens when everything is religion, you look for ways in which more things can become religion. The ADL changing the numbers, in my mind, that's very much like what we would call the chumrification of Judaism, where everything becomes a stringency. We need to do this. Well, my grandmother didn't do this. Well, no, we need more of this. This is how you show your basic Judaism, is you show everybody's out to get us. What else can we do to change the nature of the only way in which we show our Judaism is to, say that Judaism is fighting anti-Semitism? It may not be the only answer, right, to the future of Judaism is to say that we fight anti-Semitism.
For me, you mentioned Haredi, and I think that's a good example. That word means to tremble. They're proud of their fear, and I don't see fear as being noble, not
Great,
fear of
yeah.
God and not fear of the world. I don't. When I think of what I'd like people to think of as Jews, it's not in their attics worried about Nazis. It's engaging with the world. When someone says something, check it, make sure who that person is and what their real intent is, and name it. I don't have any prescription for it. I can tell you that this name calling and labeling thing, the Jewish N-word went up on tablet, and it's kind of funny. I was called by one person, a left-wing woke OTD person. By others, I was called a white male conservative. And that's because that's just the culture we live in. You call somebody a name, you call somebody something, and you don't have to deal with it. I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors. And I sometimes wonder if the way we're treating all this is giving Hitler the last laugh. I sometimes picture him down in hell going, wow, I really fucked with their heads. 80 years later, they still can't get past it. And I don't particularly feel like giving him that win.
There is something about making the Holocaust sacrosanct that I struggle with. If we say that only the people in World War II who did these very specific things are like this, is no one else allowed to have a Holocaust? Can we talk about was there a Holocaust in Darfur? Was there an Armenian Holocaust? Is Holocaust only a word that can be applied to this one specific thing?
You're right. I never suggested that. That's the Jewish Holocaust.
But that feels different for you than Nazi.
Well, when you talk about the Jewish Holocaust, I think I know what you mean, and it's very specific. Calling somebody a Nazi has been degraded. I never heard anyone say, I don't know what you did to these eggs, but it's like a chicken Holocaust in here. But, I have heard people called grammar Nazis. And so I think that it's a question of how and when. I don't think that Holocausts or genocides, unfortunately, aren't reserved for Jews. And though we said never again, it did happen again since then. And it happened before in Africa and the Holodomor. So there are definitely, sadly, instances of genocide and Holocausts. I guess what I'm asking for is specificity. And at some level, I can't tell you what to say or not. You want to go call someone a Nazi for parking your car wrong? Go ahead. But I'm asking for a little bit of restraint and understanding that words expire. They don't last forever. They have a shelf life. When I was in yeshiva, they told me a very twisted thing as a little kid. In order to get me to not talk in class, they told us that God, before you're born, gives you a set amount of words that you can say in your life. And when you've said the last number, you die. If you say it by the time you're 7, you die. If you say it by the time you're 90, you die then. So be careful with what you say, because God's counting your words. Now that's extremely abusive and insane. Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm not laughing because I heard the same things also.
But there is something to the idea that words expire, that words have a number of usage, and Nazi and racist and homophobe and loads of others these days, it's like someone's drilled a hole in the bottom and all the power is just draining out of them. And I don't know what words we're going to use to replace them. because there aren't any. Those are the best ones.
All right. Well, on that note, Shalom, thanks so much for the conversation. Will you do us a favor and stick around for the nachas?
Yes.
Excellent. Shalom, what's your nachas this week?
How do people answer that?
Well,
I would say, like, what do you like this week, or what are you plugging, or why are you on the road? But what's your nachas?
Basically a little bit. We've been doing this for years. I guess it's become short.
I find it mysterious too, how you're supposed to answer it. So I will follow everybody else's lead, despite week after week answering it.
Let's see. What is my nachas this week? I watched a tremendous documentary on Showtime about Dick Gregory, who that everyone should watch, who is an absolute genius and knew the value of words and the power of humor in using them. So I would definitely recommend that. And then if there's something I'm feeling particularly proud of, it's that I'm about 5 months out from publishing a memoir called Fe. And some of the stuff that we've discussed today, I discuss in that book as well.
Didn't you write a memoir already?
I did. I wrote Foreskin's Lament about 20 years ago.
It was a setup for that for me, but for also me to be able to say another memoir. Fe.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like that I've given some clever book reviewers at an
opening
is meh, or whatever, they'll come up with something hilarious.
Phoebe, what's your nachas this week?
My nachas is going to be, it's connected with the Only Murders topic, and it's an interview of Martin Short, the actor from Only Murders in the Building, in 1979, being interviewed on a CBC, I believe, show, and talking about how he himself was interviewed by the CJN because the Canadian Jewish News thought that Martin Short was Jewish.
People actually believe that you were my cousin? Did someone
That's true. I got a call from the Canadian Jewish News one day, and this girl, let's call her Marcia Levy, said, because that was her name, and she said, I'd like to do an interview with you. And it went on, and she was setting up the time, and should I go to my house or her house or just meet? And I finally said, I thought about it, and I said, I'm not Jewish, I'm Catholic, I'm not Jewish. She said, well, aren't you David Steinberg's cousin? I said, no, I'm not David Steinberg's cousin. Hello. Hello. And she never, so I don't know whether she was mad that I wasn't your cousin or I wasn't Jewish.
I don't know either, but
we could phone her, because...
But it's nice to know that, but I do have a cousin, Morris Steinberg, who is available for interviews if Marcia is listening. And he's a psychiatrist and very funny.
Avi, what's your nachas this week?
I want to call out a nice blog post that I just read from Marginal Revolution, which is a blog run by Tyler Cowen, who's an economist at George Mason University. There was a post that came up. No one's name was changed at Ellis Island. And this is something that I'd heard from colleagues, from academics, that was like so succinctly put in this blog post that I highly recommend everybody go out and check it out. The idea that like no one's family name was changed, altered, shortened, butchered, or written down wrong at Ellis Island or any other American port, that idea is an urban legend. It was so great for people to like take these things, that we assume are real or are important, or this is exactly what happened to the Jews, and this is why names are changed. Not true. The line that I loved was like, it's vital to remember that the people coming over from Europe and other places were paying passengers, not cattle. They weren't shoved onto ships and then dumped onto American shores to be newly categorized by harried immigration officials. It's like, these people had tickets. There was passenger manifests. They were given over to immigration officials, and the immigration officials weren't trying to make their names less foreign. The reason why these people spoke all these different languages, the officials were often hired because they spoke multiple languages, and in fact, they would never try to do that. The names were changed often much later. So that's my nachas for the week. Go read that and go learn that your family legend about Zaidi, or great-grandfather Zaidi, great-great Zaidi, changing his name, not true. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending January 20th, Shabbat Parashat Bo. The show is produced and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.